Square Enix has promised that they will not cheat when it comes to Final Fantasy 7 Remake Part 3's Airship. It's gonna be hard to pull off, as hard as I get when I see my girl's bare tits. The defense mode switching to attack mode, and it's not gonna be easy, that's for sure. Right now I'm reading here in this article that it says the fans are worried, which we are, that they're gonna, the fans are wondering, right here it says, but some fans have wondered whether the original airship system would be replicated in the upcoming game given its expanded detail and scope. And they, as reported by 4Gamer, translated by Siliconera producer Yoshiniro Kitase, if I'm saying that right, and director, I'm not gonna keep saying these Japanese names, I'm gonna fucking butcher. To an audience of fans at the Korean G-Star 2024 gaming conference, that the airship introduction part 3 means the world needs to be experienced from a higher perspective. We will not cheat with the airship system in Final Fantasy 7 Remake Part 3, but take the challenge head on so that it will freely fly all over the game map and blah, as you can see. So basically, they're going to try to replicate it as much as humanly possible. Now, supposedly, later in the article, it says that 27 is when the game is expected to be released, which sounds about right. That's 4 years after the last one. And they already have the world built. All they got to do is just, you know, expand upon it. Like, they pretty much just, they didn't make, like, you know when a studio director makes part 2 and part 3 at the same time? Like, he making a sequel to a movie and they shoot part 2 and part 3 and just release it, because again, part 2 is going to make money anyway, and part 3 is going to be right there. Now, they didn't make the whole game ahead of time, but instead of taking 12 years or 10 years to make a fucking game and release it all at once, and then it's going to be released under price because you would have put so much money into it by that point, then you'll basically be another version of Concord. Took how many years to fucking make? Years to come up with that shit, and then you take so long to make a game, you might be making it for one console generation, and then a new console generation creeps up, and then you end up getting left behind in that regard, and then you have to make it for both consoles. There was a smart way to do it, which is release it in parts. We're gonna make a part of it, and we're not just gonna make the Midgard part and like take all these years to make the Midgard part, and then start working on part 2, and then it takes 8 years to come out. Now we're gonna do the Midgard part, comes out now, and then 4 years we'll work on the rest of the parts, and then we release that, and then we work another 4 years on the other section, and then we do that. I mean, it was a smart way to do it. You know, at first, when I first heard that the remake was getting put on parts, I was just as annoyed as anyone else. But then when you realize how big the original one was in those 32-bit graphics, and now that has to be replicated in today's graphics, how long that would take, then it made more sense. And of course, they're milking us fans for more money. They're like, we're not going to spend all this money on this big giant game and sell it for $70, and which is going to be undervalued at that point. And they're going to make a profit and they'll hope that the game sells well. They're like, we're going to release that shit in parts and make the fans buy it over and over again. So they've only... Well, how much did the last one sell? Like, what, 5 to 7 million? Like, if that's the only people that are going to buy it, they're going to buy it 3 times. So it's going to be like selling the whole game, and then the whole game's like 21 million, which would be a profit. I'm sure it only takes like, what, 1 million copies, or maybe even less than that to make a profit, but still. You want to please the shareholders, don't you? I already beat the first game. Rebirth wasn't, I haven't played Rebirth yet. There's a few other games I want to beat before I get a Rebirth. I just started getting into video games again. But from what I heard, and here's the funny thing, if you go online and read Reddit posts and all this stuff, people are debating whether it's open world or not. Some people are calling it open world, some people are calling it linear. Now, I'm like, there's no way that game is as linear as the first one was, like, no doubt linear. You can't, there's no debate about the original remake. That shit was linear. So how the fuck is this one linear? From what I hear, people are complaining that it's, one person described it, and there's a Reddit person, of course, as wide linear. Which, what the fuck does that even mean, wide linear? It's either it's open world or it's linear. There's no fucking in between. Yeah, I know some games are more open world than others, but that doesn't mean just because one game is more, just because you have more freedom and can do things in a certain different order than other open world games, doesn't mean that it's not an open world game. And that some open world games have more freedom than others, like Breath of the Wild style, where you pretty much beat the game in any order and do everything however you feel like. And then there's games like Final Fantasy 7, which even the original one was like this, where the story is linear. Like doing the story is linear. You have to do it step by step and how they wanted to tell a story. They don't have it where the story just spread out everywhere and you can just do whatever in whatever fucking fashion you feel like. It's done in a linear path, but the game itself is open world. So then the question beholds, what the fuck is open world and what's linear? Linear is like a hallway, where like you're in a game like the last story was. And that last story you already know is like my favorite RPG. But if that game was open world, that would even drive it over the edge for me being my favorite RPG times 10. Well, basically, everything is like a hallway, linear path, and and then you have then you can have your little towns and stuff that that has a little bit of space, but like it's not an open world. It's just a freaking town. What is it? An open town game? It has stages. Every stage is open ended, but it's a stage. And you can't go outside the stage, and like the stage has walls. It's like the end of their universe of that stage. You can't go past it. And so an open world game is basically everything in the game is in one world. That's it. That's an open world game. There's no other way to describe it. Like in Mario Odyssey, you have to leave one world to go to the other one. That's not an open world game. You have to go in a spaceship, go to one world, and it has you can only do everything in one world, and then you have to go to the next world. But in my stupid blanking out ass. And Bowser's Fury. In Bowser's Fury, everything was in one world. GTA, everything is in one world. It's one really big world where everything you need to do is in that world. There's no loading and any of that stuff. Everything is in one world. That's what I'm saying. Now, obviously, there's movie scenes and stuff, but if everything is in one world and there's no loading between anything, everything is just done right there on the spot. There's no, the screen has to. In old school RPGs where the screen the game has to pretty much change to a different game. Talking about Final Fantasy 7, it was a puppet game until the battle system. Once you're in a battle system, then everyone is all of a sudden, they're adult grown versions. But outside of the battle system, everyone is a fucking puppet. See, that's not open world. The original Final Fantasy 7 was open world-ish, but you had to load in and out from one place to the other. But if everything is done under one world, there is no. Now, obviously, every game has to load to a degree. I'm talking about your screen going black for it to load to the next thing. At least that's my definition of it. If you even call that a definition. Like God of War, you could say it's open world, but then again, that goes against my own rule because it loads in and out between places or whatever. Now, did Breath of the Wild do that? I don't think so. Maybe my own rule doesn't even make sense. Does it have to load or does it have to load? Because my thing is when you play an MMORPG, right? There's no loading of anything. Everything is there in that one space. There might be a movie scene here and there, but everything is under one roof. There's no loading to do a battle. There's no loading to do anything. It's just open world. Everything is under that one world. You don't have to leave and then the screen has to load to open another world, because in a normal linear game, the world whatever stage you're in, it closes that out and then it opens up a new one. But in an open world game, everything is just there under one roof. So that's why that makes it an open world game. So in that aspect, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth has to be considered open worldish. Not even open worldish, it's an open world game. The story may be linear, but the world is open. Everything is under one world, and you can do everything by going in there and in and out. So right now my brain is trying to think. Every game has to load to a degree. So screw what I said about the loading shit. That doesn't make any sense. There's just different types of open world games. But the open world games like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild that are really open-ended and gives you total complete freedom, people consider that open world, but I think they're just confusing that with the freedom level that you get from the game. Open world is everything under one roof. Alright? If there's no walls to the world, if you have one big giant open world and there's no stages, or there's walls between the stages, you have to completely exit out of that stage to go to the next stage. If there's one big giant, the hub world, the open world is the hub world, where everything is under one world pretty much, and there's even if there's stages and stuff and levels inside or dungeons inside that open world, as long as everything is in that one world, as long as there's one giant hub world that holds everything you have to do in that game, then it is indeed an open world game. So Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth may not be open world to your liking, but it is an open world game. And yes, and if there's stages in the open world that are linear, like towns and stuff, where everything is hallway-ish, that doesn't really truly matter, as long as you could pretty much go to from one stage to the other in one world. Right? There's one world where you could go and do it. Then it's an open world. But now the question leads to, what the hell are we gonna do about? The question leads to, how is Part 3 gonna play out? It's probably gonna just be a little expanded version of what Part 2 was, Rebirth. You're gonna have an airship that you could go pretty much. They still have the same structure and everything of the open world from Rebirth. All they gotta do is add a spare airship that makes you go all around there, to and back, front to back. It doesn't really need to be an open world game. It just needs to be what 7 was, but with better graphics. Now in part 3, if you could have the airship and you could pretty much go from the beginning, from Midgard to pretty much go anywhere that the original game had, then that should be enough. They have 4 years to do it. They already have the game, the frame of the game built already. So all they gotta do is just put an airship, make you be able to go to and from anywhere, and that's basically it. They don't really need to do that. They'll probably be more open worldish than even part 2 was, Rebirth. But that's all it really needs to be. Plus, Final Fantasy doesn't really know how to do open world games anyway. They know how to do linear games real good, but they don't know how to do open world games. So the best they can do is just put everything on the one outside world, where you can access these like linear paths in the outside world, and it's basically an open world game. But it's not like Breath of the Wild-ish, where all the fighting could happen either outside. But the fighting could happen outside in Rebirth too, though. It's just that just because there's linear paths and linear levels in the open world game doesn't mean anything. Like Final Fantasy 15, that game went from open world to linear. Like the last few stages, the last few chapters of that game were completely linear. You completely left that. You completely exited the open world that they were doing. Because again, they don't know how to do open world, which is why they abandoned it midway. And then they should have just went linear because that's what they're used to and that's what they're comfortable with. So that game went from open world to linear just like that. So that was, so like everything under one roof, that's an open world game. If there's one giant hub world that holds every stage and everything you could do in that world, then it's open world. Now, it may be that the whole game isn't like played open world. It could just be that outside part is open world, and then the important things you have to do in the story mode is probably in certain levels in that open world that become linear. It's still technically an open world game. It's just that maybe the story is not open world. The story is linear, and maybe the paths and certain parts of it is linear, but it's still pretty much an open world game. So I guess that's where the debate comes from. Because people that are true fans in open world, they want every aspect of the open world. They want freedom. They want to be able to do the levels of whatever order. But for me, at least in my definition, the way I describe it, you might have your own definition of what open world game is. And that's perfectly fine. But to me, that's what I consider open world. Anyways, attack most is back to the fence. Mom, peace.